Welcome to another Old Soul, New Soul astrology podcast with Robert Glasscock. I'm Thomas Miller, getting things kicked off here. We have a question that Robert is going to tackle from a listener not from the United States.
Hello, I've recently discovered a bit about declinations and out-of-bounds planets. It's something I'm really new to and I've started looking into. And I've discovered I've got two planets out of bounds, which is Mars and Mercury. I was wondering if you could just touch upon the subject a little bit, just so I could understand it a bit better, because I really love the way you two explain topics. I find it a lot easier to understand when you guys explain it on your show. Do you read it a lot in a chart, in a person's individual chart? And does it make a difference if those out of bounds planets are north or south, and if so, what kind of difference does it make? Stuff like that. If you wouldn't mind touching upon that, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Well, we love your accent, which of course to you is not an accent, but it is to us, and we love it anyway. So thank you so much for sending us that question. Robert, we've talked about this a few times, but here is a dedicated episode where we're just going to flag it and go over it one more time, hopefully maybe in a little bit more depth. So walk us through out of bounds.
Well, she's asking a couple of questions here. One is about declinations, which have to do with parallels, which is an aspect that many astrologers still use, the parallel. And all that the parallels mean, you can look in the ephemeris and see the declination of a planet to get your program to list it out. If two planets are in the same parallel, either north or south of the ecliptic, then they're read almost like a conjunction, even though they may not be in one of the Ptolemaic aspects. Or if they are in the same degree, but one is a north parallel and the other one is a south parallel, that's called a contraparallel. And many astrologers treat that like an opposition aspect. So there's that. There's the parallel aspect. Then there's out of bounds. And what the out of bounds, everybody's heard of the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Well, those tropics are both above and below the equator or below the ecliptic. And that is the northernmost and southernmost apparent positions that the sun ever gets during a year. So planets that go beyond the tropics, the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, are considered to be out of bounds. They're beyond the apparent range of north or south latitude that the sun traces during the year. So that's really what that means. Do I use them? No. Haven't in decades, I guess. But I tell everybody the only way to learn astrology, learn this stuff, if you read something that interests you, try it. So when I first read about parallels, those were pretty common when I started out in 65, and I tried them. It's not that they don't work. It's just that I never got anything from parallels and contraparallels that I didn't already see and get elsewhere in the chart. So it was just an unnecessary extra step. And when I started out, we didn't have computers. We had to hand calculate all this stuff. So it was a waste of time as far as I was concerned. So I don't use them, but you can find out various interpretations for planets in parallel or contraparallel or out of bounds anywhere in Google. But that's the basic principle of it. And the same with out of bounds planets. I never used them. I tried them in the beginning. I just didn't find at least the meanings that I was reading that they supposedly held. I thought, well, yeah, but I already got that over here. So I found the same thing there. So that's just me. I didn't feel that I was getting enough value out of calculating these things to bother with them. But that doesn't mean that other astrologers won't find value in them.
Where else do you find that information in the chart?
Oh, a lot of ways. For example, chiron I don't use either. Not because it doesn't work, it does. But when it first became popularized, I tried it and I thought, great, the wounded healer. I've got Mercury and Jupiter in Virgo in my ninth house. I'm already the wounded healer. You see what I mean? So it doesn't add anything. I'll tell you honestly, philosophically, where I get with a lot of this, Thomas, especially when people are starting out, because there is a certain amount of astrology that absolutely appears fatalistic. Things like what hooked me on astrology, something as simple as an old book telling me that I had a mole mark or a scar on the left side of my face. That just brought me up short. So that seems to be fatalistic. And then you read the books, the old books. They're all using charts to illustrate their points, in which the horoscope is astoundingly accurate. Always, and astoundingly predictable and fatalistic. Always. And that's the implication. And you go back in history and you realize all these different house systems were originally devised trying to make astrology ever more accurate and therefore ever more fatalistic. These were astrologers working in the court, and they were being paid a pretty penny to be right and tell these kings and queens when to go to battle and so on. So this idea, I think, lurks under a lot of astrologers. They think that somewhere there's a holy grail, some technique that's going to make them the one astrologer on earth who can predict everything for anybody, just like that person was a machine or a clock. And that's never going to happen. It's a fool's mission. What you can do with these archetypes, if you know what they mean and understand the energies and understand the house systems and the rulerships of the houses by the planets and so on, if you understand astrology, it gives you an incredible amount of useful information. But it is not fatalistic. Yes, the stars do impel, but they don't compel, as the old cliche goes. And what I've found is the more unconscious people are, the less spiritual, the less metaphysical they are, the more fatalistically you can read their charts. It's that simple. When they awaken, whether it's through astrology or just their own consciousness or any other discipline, but once a person is consciously awake, and I think this is what happens to people when they go to an astrologer. Some of them want fortune telling, but I think most people, certainly who come to me, they have already internally made a decision, consciously or not, to stop letting life live them and to start living their own life more consciously. Can astrology help me do that? You bet it can. So that's a different approach to this. So you're talking about tendencies and the probabilities. This is something that's likely to happen under this aspect. That's a completely different thing than saying, so-and-so is going to have an accident on December the 22nd. So that's why it's not that the chiron or out of bounds or parallels and so on don't work. It's just that for me, I never found that they really added anything to justify my looking at them. But that's just me.
Okay, so why don't you walk us through a couple of those other places when you say I already have this and I don't want to redraw it back in the days before computers. Totally understand that one. Wow, yeah. What are some of those areas? Where do you look?
All right, well, first of all, how do you define out of bounds? And would you see a planet that's out of bounds? How do you treat? What's your approach to out of bounds? And then I'll show you.
Yeah, I had the idea that it was that planet being naughty. In fact, I think, and to use her accent, I think that was how it was explained. They're being naughty, Robert. They're being naughty.
Okay, well, that's pretty vague in general. What the hell does that mean?
So then, when I was...
You could say that about any hard aspect.
When I was learning... Oh, you sure could. You could say that about a conjunction.
So far, you haven't given me a reason yet to look at out of bounds, because you can say naughty about any planet in hard aspect. But go ahead.
Well, so then, as I was learning this, I was just finishing my skiing days up in Colorado. And as you know, on any ski slope in America that's managed, there are ropes. And it says boundary, ski boundary. Well, in any ski boundary, there are ski tracks. Somebody's been under that rope. And to me, that was a perfect mental picture because I was a skier. I never did that. I wanted to keep my lift ticket. But there are people who decided to be naughty. and go under the ropes, and they are having fun and they are playing and there's nobody else around and they can do whatever they want and they can make fresh tracks through the trees and they're going wee and they're having this big old time. And then sometimes waiting at the bottom of the hill for them is ski patrol and you get your ticket taken away. So that gave me enough clarity that I could have a fun image in my mind of, well, okay, so Mercury, she mentioned Mars. Well, Mars going a little crazy, I could start to paint with that. Like it could be a little extra aggressive. Okay. It could be something where we say, wow, I've got this project I want to start. Mars is out of bounds and or she has it in her natal chart. I'm thinking more transit, but natal chart that she might have this propensity to really be a self-starter. And maybe she even needs to throttle that back a little bit. Or Mercury, being careful what you say sometimes. Count to 5, that deal. So those are the ways that I've incorporated it, just to say that it's a planet on steroids. I call it, on the Fun Astrology podcast, I call it a planet on steroids. It's like, or I do this. The moon has gone boing. It's out of bounds. It's like boing. Think of that, Jack in the Box.
You know me enough because you've been in enough classes. You know that my mantra is make something out of everything you see.
Right.
So I am a big believer that even newbies, people brand new to this stuff, can begin to think their way through anything. Planets that are out of bound, and here's how I think of them. They are either above or below the 2 tropics. So they're out of the boundaries of the sun's apparent motion. Therefore, they are beyond the boundary of illumination or consciousness, and they operate autonomously to that degree. So they operate out of the bounds of my awareness, my conscious awareness. In her case, Mercury and Mars. All right, I would see that elsewhere as well. I would see it in hard aspects to Neptune. Same thing. I would see it in hard aspects involving the mutable signs, especially Pisces, Virgo. You see what I mean? So I've already seen that. So now what I will notice for example, I have this in my own chart. I have Mercury, and to do this, you have to have one of the planets has to be in its home sign. I have Mercury in Virgo, its own sign. Jupiter's also in Virgo. So Mercury rules Jupiter. I have Uranus in Gemini. Square that Jupiter. Well, Mercury rules that Uranus. But that little trio of planets, all ruled by Mercury, stick out like a sore thumb because every other planet in my chart is ruled by a single planet, except that one little group. So my Mercury, Jupiter, and Uranus operate in essence just like out of bounds planets. They operate apart from the rest of me, and boy, do I perceive that. I've always had this incredible sense of separation from a very intense life. I'm in life very intensely, but I've also always been observing it simultaneously, and that's all that detachment, that Mercury, Jupiter, Uranus detachment. So to me, the out of bounds definitions, become observable elsewhere, but it's the same effect. But that's what I mean by thinking your way through things. If the planet is out of the boundaries of the sun's apparent latitude and longitude during the year's course, then that means it's outside the bounds of my consciousness. And that means I have to consciously make an effort to become more aware of what my Mars and Mercury archetypes are all about. What houses do they rule? What aspects do they make? Are they in good signs for the natures of Mercury and Mars and so on? So I'd want to get more and more consciously aware of the potentials in that Mercury and Mars by house, sign, position, aspects, and so on, rulerships in the chart. So that's a key if you want to study out of bounds, to begin to focus on them consciously.
Well, I just had to peek while Robert was talking there, and Robert does not officially buy the definition of out of bounds, which is that a planet is beyond north or south 23 degrees 27 minutes. He doesn't have any in that definition, but that was a great example of planets that even are not technically out of bounds, but fit that same characteristic, that here is amplified energy in your chart from 3 planets that have these distinct characteristics. The other thing is, obviously, there are so many different ways that anything in astrology can be interpreted. And there are basics, and then there are variations. So I love your example of beyond the boundaries of consciousness. And I kind of like the idea, too, of planets that are a little naughty.
Well, you're a Scorpio. What can I say?
Well, and like you said, this was great. This is what it really boils down to, is with a somewhat vague line of latitude, an out-of-bounds line, right? Where is that rope? Well, that rope wasn't there. The rope was over here. But play with how this shows up in your own life and see if Mercury and Mars have been a little naughty for you, or see if they've been a little unconscious for you. See what the best interpretation is.
I wanted to just add something to another way to think about out-of-bounds planets. Neither one of us have them, but if they are beyond the bounds, the tropics, they're out of bounds. They are almost like people or even children knocking, trying to get in. And that's really not a bad metaphor for those things, because if Mercury, for example, and Mars are out of bounds, Mercury rules the mind, thoughts, the capacity to analyze and prioritize and so on, logic, facts, reason. Mars is action. So if both of her planets are out of bounds in the southern latitude, then they can be read more like a conjunction. But if one of them is out of bounds in the northern latitude, the other one in the southern latitude, then they can be read more like an opposition. So the point of that is for her to become more conscious about her Mercury and Mars energies, how she thinks and acts, how she puts her thoughts into actions, how she executes her goals. Does she take care of the detail work that's necessary with Mercury? Does she make her deadlines, all the little details that you have to do when you're trying to, say, start a business or start a relationship or anything else? Her actions and her words and thoughts, Mercury, may need to become more conscious to get into synchronicity with the rest of her and the rest of her life. Because people represented by those 2 planets will also enter her life from outside of her boundaries, do you see? So people ruled by Mercury and Mars, as well as people ruled by the houses that those 2 planets rule in her chart, will also tend to come into her life from outside the boundaries. Fascinating.
And better than naughty. Even though
an exercise in self-censorship right here.
Even though it didn't go down a scorpionic path. That's great. Well, hopefully that answers your question. And thanks, Robert, for playing outside the ropes with us today. If you would like to book a session and explore your out-of-bounds potentials, then you could get a hold of Robert through the direct link that's in our show notes. Our horary course is answering so many questions for so many people. If you would like to learn the mystique and the rules of asking astrology a question, that course is available. It's on the funastrology.com website. Robert's booklets are also available there for download if you'd like to get those. And all the other resources, our Discord group, YouTube channel, etc. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.